Okay, good morning, everyone. For those of you joining us at home, welcome. This is the Sunday before Christmas, and we pray the Lord is with you and that He is blessing you in this Christmas season. It's a wonderful, wonderful time. We pray that you're in the Lord this year. We are in class number 14, and we're going to be studying Exodus from verse 12:42 to 13:22, which is the end of chapter 13 today. And when we left off last week, we talked a whole bunch about verses 40 and 41, which was about the timing of the Exodus and when it all occurred. And we're now going to start with verse 42 through 50. Let me read those verses to you first of all. Yes, Steve?
Brian Brimke and I were discussing our Bible studies last week on both the Network and Local Supper. And the question is, when we die today, our souls go to heaven. And then when this rapture or exodus, whatever you want to call it, happens, we get new bodies.
Correct.
Okay?
Yes.
And we're the Christians that died because of Jesus dying on the cross. Those that died before Jesus died, are those souls still remaining here on earth, or are they in heaven?
Are you talking about Christians who died?
Christians
Now, that would
died
be a very
before Christ.
limited group who accepted Christ during his public ministry and then died before the end of his public ministry. Are you talking about that group, or are you talking about Jews before that?
Before that, they believed in God, but they were still waiting for Christ to
Okay.
appear.
People who believed in God before that are in a place, it's called the bosom of Abraham. It is in the Bible. Look up go and look up the bosom of Abraham, that term, you will find it in there. And they are waiting for Jesus to return. Now, there are some pieces of if you look at what Jesus did after the resurrection, there are some indications that he may have visited the bosom of Abraham during that period. Perhaps he did something with those people. We're not exactly sure what he may or may not have done with them. Or perhaps their souls are still there. But we do know that they're not going to get their bodies until later on during the tribulation. They don't get their bodies at the beginning of the tribulation. Those of us that are believers through Christ will get our bodies at the rapture, at the time of the rapture. Those who are not believers through Christ will get new bodies, but they won't get them at the time of the rapture. They'll get them later on in the tribulation. If I had enough time, I could find you the passage in tribulation that talks
I just
about
wonder
them
where
getting
their souls
that.
were at, whether they were still here on earth or their rapture.
Their souls would be, I believe their souls would be with God today, but their bodies are not yet risen. And their bodies won't be risen when we rise. They will rise a few years later. Any other questions? Okay, let me read verses 42 through 50. Those of you that have the thing here in class, it's a little bit of an eye test. It's have a lot jammed into that page. Because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt, on this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come. That is talking about the Passover. So bear in mind the Jews have been following Abraham at this point, following God all the way from the time of Abraham, which is 430 years earlier, until this time. What God is saying here is, during that entire 430 years, whatever may have occurred, whatever activities may have occurred, none of those are to be remembered permanently except this one, the Passover. That's the only thing from that first 430 years that is to be remembered permanently forever, is the Passover. And that's because that was the night God kept vigil. Vigil means be on guard. God kept vigil and saved the Jews on that night. So that's what God is saying in that verse. So that we've heard this a couple times already. We're going to continue to see it in other places today. God is reiterating again and again and again to the Jews, keep the Passover sacred. That's what God is saying. Okay?
So you're saying none of the other observances and the feasts and all of it,
Nothing that's happened before the Passover is to be observed. After the Passover, there are other things that we're going to come to. In fact, in a couple of verses, we're going to get to some things that happened after the Passover. But anything before the Passover, from the time Israel began, which was Abraham, 430 years, we went through all that last week, 430 years. Anything that happened during that 430 years, not to be observed. That is not something that that God wants you to worship him on. He only wants you to worship him on Passover, up to that point. Now things will change from that point. Okay. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal." So what's going to happen now is, up until now, remember we talked last week, they were under the Abrahamic covenant. And under the Abrahamic covenant, they didn't have to do anything. Remember, Abraham was asleep when he made the covenant with God. God really made the covenant with him. Abraham was in a sleep. He didn't do anything to get the covenant. God gave him all these blessings. They all passed down to his children and his children's children and all that. That's going to change now. We are about to change to the covenant of Mount Sinai. That will happen in a few classes from now. We'll see that. We're going to see that God will give the Jews laws at Mount Sinai that they will have to obey, like the Ten Commandments, for example. So things are going to be different now. The Lord's beginning to explain that to them, that things are about to be different from how they were under the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is still there. God's promises to them are still there. That's still there. But now there are going to be some laws they're going to have to follow. And here's the first one. These are the regulations for the Passover meal. So there are regulations for the Passover meal. There are laws. No foreigner may eat it. Okay, so you must be a Jew to eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him. So if he's in your household as a slave, you circumcise him, then he can eat the Passover. But a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. So if he's not your worker and you haven't circumcised him, he can't eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. So you have a couple of rules there, right? You have to eat indoors. You can't go put a tent up and eat this outdoors. You have to eat it indoors. You can't break any of the bones of the animal. So it's not like if you're taking a chicken wing apart and you break a bone or something. You can't do that. You're not allowed to break the bones of the animal. That's God's rule. And you can't take anything outside. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. So all Jews must celebrate it on that night, the Feast of Passover, the Festival of Passover. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. So a foreigner can celebrate the Passover with you, in other words, a non-Jew, if he is circumcised, and if anybody in his household who's attending is circumcised. So again, these are rules people have to follow. We're now this is the beginning of the covenant of Mount Sinai. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. So any male who wants to eat it cannot eat it if he's not circumcised. The same law applies to both native-born and foreign-born residing among you. So it does, and by the way, so that's true of Jews too. A Jew is not a real Jew and cannot really partake of the Passover meal unless he is circumcised, if he's a male. So we're done. That's the first set of rules for the Passover right there. Now, continuing on, we come to so God wants only this night, the Passover, to be remembered by the Jews. Now, similarly, one day there will be another day that the Jews will remember, and it will be their second Passover. It will be the day that they accepted their Messiah. Now, that day will come at the end of the tribulation. It will actually occur on the last day of the tribulation. And that is in Isaiah. I've got that on the back of your handout here. If you turn your Bible verse handout over, this is Isaiah 65, verses 16 through 19. Isaiah explains what that day will be like. Whoever invokes a blessing in the land will do so by the one true God. Whoever takes an oath in the land will swear by the one true God. For the past troubles will be forgotten and hidden from my eyes. So God is saying, when this day comes, we're going to talk about this day in a minute, but when this day comes, whatever the Jews have done in the past will be forgiven and forgotten. It will be a whole new day. Everything will start again at that point. See, I will create new heavens and a new earth. That will happen shortly after that. God will create a new heaven and a new earth. That is in Revelation 21 and 22. The former things will not be remembered. So whatever sins Jews committed before that, once they have accepted their Messiah, will not be remembered. Nor will they come to mind. So God will never think of them again. But be glad and rejoice forever. So at that point, any Jew who accepts his Messiah at that point will be in a second situation just like the Messiah. He will have been delivered. He will have been delivered for the Lord. In what I will create, for what I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and a joy for its people. So Jerusalem, Israel, will now be a delight and a joy for God's people. And that will also carry into the New Jerusalem, which is a little bit later in the process. I will rejoice over Jerusalem. So God will be so happy on that day when his people, his chosen people, have finally accepted their Messiah. And take delight in my people. He's going to take delight in them. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. So there will never again be pain in Israel after that day. So it did say also in here that they will go out, in the verse we just read, that they will go out by their divisions. All the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. They all did it. Every Jew said yes. Bear in mind, they've just been released from Egypt. They're just on their way out, and they say, yes, we're going to follow you, Moses and Aaron. We're going to do exactly what the Lord tells us. And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. So they came out by tribes. They organized by tribes. Each tribe organized together. Divisions means tribes. There were 12 tribes at that time, yes. Eventually the tribe of Dan got itself into trouble, and later on the tribe of Joseph was blessed with a kind of a split, if you will, between Manasseh and Ephraim, yes. Thank you. Sometimes my brain forgets little details. Yes, so let's move on to chapter 13, unless anybody has any questions on that. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. So now what we're going to look at is the consecration of Israel to the Lord. This happens next. Just as they're leaving Israel, this happens. Consecrate to me every firstborn male. That means circumcision. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. Now that's interesting. Remember a couple of weeks ago when we were studying the 10th plague, it said that not only that it said that if they were Egyptians would die during that 10th plague, the firstborn animals. So the firstborn sheep is going to die, and the firstborn cow is going to die. Why does the Lord care about killing cattle and sheep? They didn't do anything, right? Why does he care about that? The answer, we're going to find out as we go through this. The answer is they're being sanctified. Well, let me explain the answer as we read through it. So now we're going to find out the answer to that question. That was a couple of weeks ago. We studied that. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day. Again, commemorate the Passover. We're hearing it again, right? Commemorate the Passover. The day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. So God brought you out of it with miracles, lots of them. And by the way, you're not done seeing them yet. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next part. Eat nothing with yeast. We talked about yeast is indicative of sin. We're trying to take sin out of the community. Today, in the month of Aviv, and it was called Aviv in Moses' time, but just not too long later, it was changed to Nisan. So by the time of Jesus, it was called the month of Nisan. It's the same month. It's just Aviv was an Egyptian name for it. Nisan is a Hebrew name for it. So eventually the Jews changed the name from the Egyptian name Aviv, which is called here, to the Hebrew name Nisan. So today in the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, just call them the ites, That's basically Canaan. So when the Lord brings you to Canaan, which will be 40 years later, the land he swore to your ancestors, that was the Abrahamic covenant, he swore that to Abraham, to give you a land flowing with milk and honey. It's going to be a beautiful land. It's God's land. You are to observe this ceremony in this month. So again, he says, you will observe the Passover in the month of Nisan every month from there on in permanently. Every month of the year, every year in that month, you will observe that. Now, we're going to move into the next day after Passover now. For 7 days, this is now the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day, hold a festival to the Lord. So now, God is telling him there's a second thing you're going to do. Besides keeping the Passover holy, you're also going to have 7 days where you eat things not made with yeast. And that last day is going to be the last and holiest day of that 7-day period. Remember, we said that commemorated the 7 days that they actually leave Israel. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. So Jewish ladies at that time of year go ahead around their house and look for yeast, and they sweep the floors to make sure there's no yeast on the floors. There's a whole thing they go through. Jewish ladies today even do that in their houses during that period to get the yeast out of the house before Passover. On that day, that would be Passover, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So when your children come up to you and say, Dad, why are we doing this? Why do we observe this thing? We're doing it because we are observing what the Lord did to get us out of Egypt, the grace of God to bring us out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. So this is the first law God is giving them, is to observe the Passover with a certain set of rules. Eventually that will all turn into this covenant of Mount Sinai that we're going to talk about here shortly. But this is the first law God actually gives them, is to observe the Passover. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time year after year. You get the impression God is saying the same thing again and again and again here, right? Observe this Passover, guys. Observe it, observe it, observe it. You need to do this. Now, so the Passover, we're going to look at the 3 covenants that are in the Bible here for a minute. The Abrahamic covenant, which was in existence 430 years already. That was God's promise to Abraham. The sign of that is circumcision. Every Jew, every descendant of Abraham, and all Jews are descendants of Abraham. Every descendant of Abraham, the male needed to be circumcised. And the memorial for that Abrahamic covenant is now the Passover. So God is saying this is now the memorial. That entire 430 years, the only part of it you're going to memorialize is the last day of the Passover. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. Remember the new covenant that we're in now, which is since Christ. Christ has replaced the Abrahamic covenant and the covenant of Mount Sinai with a new covenant. And that new covenant is that if we accept the sacrifice he did for us on the cross, then we will be saved from our sins. The sign of that we have today is baptism. And the memorial that we do on a regular basis, in our church we do it once a month, is communion. So it's just like the Jews do Passover as their memorial, we do communion. The Jews do circumcision as their memorial, we do baptism. Now we'll see as we get into this, when we start looking at the covenant of Mount Sinai, which will be happening here shortly, the sign is going to be the law that God's going to give them. It's going to be a lot more rules than what we just saw here. Plus, the observance of those rules will be the actual memorial itself that they will do. And they'll do that on a regular basis. Questions on that? Okay. Verse 11, after the Lord brings you out of the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to you and to your ancestors. Again, that's talking about the Abrahamic covenant now. But after the Lord brings you out and brings you into Canaan, which is where they're going eventually. Canaan is way up in here. brings you to Canaan, which is now going to be called Israel, once he brings you to Canaan, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. Wait a minute. So now we understand why God cares about the first offspring of every womb, the human offspring and the animal offspring. Or do we? Let's continue and see why God's telling us this. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb your firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. So, God is drawing a distinction here between the firstborn human of the Jews and the firstborn animals of the Jews. And what he's saying is, firstborn humans, redeem your sons. Firstborn humans, by the way, God is sanctifying firstborns here. He's blessing firstborns. He's saying firstborns are special. He's sanctifying firstborns. So he's saying, if it's a human being, redeem it. In other words, sanctify it by, what's the word I'm looking for? I have the word here in my notes. Just give me a second.
Substitutionary atonement.
Well, the substitutionary atonement is about the animals. I'm going to get to that in a second. Okay, I can't find my place on that. But anyway, God is saying, if it's a human being, it is already sanctified. If you've done circumcision, and if you've done this part over here, circumcision, keep the Passover, then your human being is sanctified. So human beings are sanctified, and they are redeemed because of the blood of animals. That's where I was going with it. Because of the blood of animals. So the blood of animals redeems them. Now, if it's an animal, then it is a redemptive animal if it is a kosher animal. Difference here. So if it's a kosher animal like a lamb or a goat, there are other kosher animals, doves, various other kosher animals. If it's a kosher animal, then the blood of that redeems your firstborns, redeems your humans, which means they die, right? Those animals die. Those kosher animals die. But if it is not a kosher animal, like a donkey is not a kosher animal, then if you want to keep your donkey, you have to redeem him by killing a kosher animal. Okay? So if you have a donkey and you want to keep your donkey, you have to kill a lamb or something like that to do that. That's what God is saying here. The lesson is not about God being mean toward lambs. The message here is, if your animal is not cleansed, if he's not clean, then he has to be redeemed. And he has to be redeemed. Right now, the only way to redeem your animal is with the blood of something that is blessed by God. And that is one of these animals that can be sacrificed. So the animal, like a lamb, is sanctified, and he can be used as a sacrifice. So he is sanctified, but he can be used as a sacrifice to redeem somebody else. He can redeem a person, or he can redeem a donkey or a horse, or there are other things that are other kinds of animals, lobsters, all kinds of animals are not kosher food. Okay, in the days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of the land of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. So fathers, when you're sitting around at Passover dinner someday and your son comes up to you or your child comes up to you and says, why are we doing this, Dad? There's the answer, right? The answer is, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of the land of Egypt, the land of slavery. So tell him that this is a commemoration of the Lord performing a whole bunch of miracles to redeem us. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This goes back to what we just talked about. The Lord did that during this 10th punishment of Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offering of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn ones. So now the Lord is closing the loop. He's explaining what I just explained here a minute ago, that this is why the firstborn of a human being in the Jews is sanctified because he is redeemed by the blood of this animal. And the firstborn of a donkey or any kind of animal who is not kosher that you want to keep has to be redeemed as well by the blood of an animal that can be used to sacrifice it. So those animals are sanctified as well, the ones that can be used to redeem others. Kind of a lot of logic in there, but that's what the Lord is saying. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. So this is all part of what we need to know as we explain to our children why we're celebrating the Passover. It's a sign, as he said. The sign. It's a memorial of the fact that the Lord brought us out of slavery. In ours, communion is a memorial of the fact that the Lord brought us out of sin. So I'm going to move on to chapter the crossing of the Red Sea piece, unless I have questions on that part. Questions on that? Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a very controversial question, which is, how did the Jews get out of Egypt? How did they get to Israel? Where did they cross the Red Sea? Where did all these names are gone today? The Jews were a nomadic people at that point. They were just passing through, so they didn't make any permanent places. So how do we answer is we don't know for sure. This is 3,500 years ago that this happened. It was in 1446 BC, almost 3,500 years ago. So we don't know for sure. Is it important? On the one hand, no, it's not essential to our faith. It's not like, we need to know that Jesus is God. That is not, it's not an essential to our faith. But we can argue about it, we can differ about it, that's perfectly acceptable. And yet God gives us all kinds of clues. So why does he give us clues? Presumably because he wants us to study it. So we're going to study it. And that's what we're going to do here the rest of today. We're going to study the route and various possibilities of how the Jews got from here in Goshen out across the Red Sea. By the way, I think Mount Horeb is probably over here. Just I'll put that up here. We'll talk about that next week, about exactly where Mount Horeb is. We don't exactly know where that is either, by the way. This is probably the most likely site is right over there. There is another site down here that many people think is Mount Horeb. It's one of those two, probably. Yes. But so the question, how did the Jews get from here to there? We don't know the exact answer. Experts today give us 7 different possible routes, and I've given you a map that shows some of those routes on it. Those of you that are at home, I'm sorry you don't have that and it's not downloadable on the system. But you'll see this map here and we'll talk about it. Basically you have Goshen up here, and there are 3 ways that would have brought the Jews right out this way. But God is going to tell us here in a verse that he probably doesn't go that way because the Philistines are right here. That's Gaza Strip today, right? It's right here. Not nice people. They weren't nice people then either. So we don't want to go up through the Gaza Strip. Why? Let's see what the Lord has to say with that. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not, this is verse 17 now. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. So we're going to talk about those couple of verses there. So God is saying, all right, you're coming out of Goshen. You're going right up here, which is Israel. Why don't we just go this way, right? Nice and simple. Probably be there, even walking with 2 or 3 million people, we'd probably be there in a month, right? No big deal. We can get there easily. Why don't we just go that way? Well, there's a number of reasons. The one that God immediately gives here is these guys are really seriously warlike people. We know the Bible, the Philistines are always at war with everybody. They're still at war with everybody today. This is the nasty, nasty area. So if we go through here and we come walking through with 2 or 3 million people and flocks of animals, and it takes us a month to pass through their territory, they're probably not going to take kindly to that. They're probably going to say, you're invading us. And they're probably going to start a war, and the people are probably, well, the people aren't ready for war. They have no military training. They have done nothing but be in slavery all of their lives. They have no leaders that are ready for war, no soldiers, nothing like that. Now, God can solve this problem if he wants to, right? I mean, God shows us all over the Bible that God can give the Jews victory when he wants to, but he's not ready to do it right here. Why? Well, that's interesting. The answer is they're not ready. They're not ready to go take over that land yet because the laws of God have not been put on their heart yet. That's really what's going to happen here in this middle part. They're going to have to go to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb and get the laws of God and have them put on their heart and go through a bunch of stuff to get to the point where their hearts are ready to go take over God's promised land. That's what's really going on here. Okay. So that's why God didn't just take them up the simple route, go right up this way, and boom, you're home. Those are the two reasons: war and the covenant of Mount Sinai. Oh, the other piece is, if they face the war, they probably, if God says, don't worry, I'll protect you, I'll get you through, they might very well have turned around and said, we're going back to Egypt. We're going back to slavery, right? We'd rather be in slavery and worship some false gods in Egypt than go and fight a war and possibly get killed. That's probably what they're going to do. Now, it also tells us in there that they had arms, which is interesting. So where did they get arms from? These people were in slavery. Nobody gives arms to slaves. That was one of the big things during the Civil War. The Southerners would not allow any of the slaves to fight for them in that war because they were afraid to arm the slaves. So you don't give arms to slaves. So how did they get arms? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us. But the most likely answer is that on the way out, when they asked the people for their money, they probably also asked them for arms. They probably said, give me a few spears and swords and shields and whatever else, and I'll bring that out with me. That's the most likely answer, but the Bible doesn't actually give us that answer, just so you know. So God's afraid they're going to change their mind. Oh, not afraid, he knows them. He knows they're going to change their mind and return to Egypt if they have to go through the Philistine country. So he's going to take them around. It says he led them around, he led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. Okay. This whole thing down here is the Red Sea. Okay. This is the Red Sea. And it has two arms up here. So we're going to find, the question is, why would God lead them to the Red Sea? And the answer is he's going to do a major league miracle here to take them across the Red Sea. That's why he's leading them there. So why is he doing it, and where did they cross? Now, the actual Hebrew name for the Red Sea, the actual name that's in the Bible is Yam Suf. Yam means sea. Easy, no question about that. That's a Hebrew word. Suf, unfortunately, is not well defined. It's one of those words that has a bazillion different uses in the Bible. The most common use is the word red, but it also can mean reed, like reeds that grow up in a shallow pond. There are a ton of other things that it could possibly mean. So there are a lot of different things that it can mean. Can you go find your grandmother? Thanks. So Yam Suf is the actual term that's in Hebrew in the Bible. We know Yam is sea. So the question is, what sea is this? Well, there's only one sea. There's the Mediterranean Sea up here. They didn't cross that. We know that. That'd be hundreds of miles. So they crossed something that's the Red Sea. So what are the routes? And if you look at biblical experts, there are 7 different routes out there that people talk about. I'm going to talk about them. 3 of those routes are pretty much on this direct route up here. They all cross, and there were roads that went through there in those days. Now, the thing to think about here, this occurred in April. The rainy season, or the season of the Nile flooding, begins in mid-June and ends at the end of August. So if you think about when is going to be the driest part of the year in Egypt, it's going to be April, May, and early June. It's going to be the driest part of the year. So this is the driest part of the year. this is the delta up here, all these little blue lines. And Goshen's in the middle of the delta, that's where they have great farmland. So all these little blue lines are the delta. So to get out of Goshen and get all the way over here, they're gonna have to cross some of these little canals. Is that what we're talking about? Is that the Red Sea? There are people that will argue that is the Red Sea, that it's some of these little canals that the Jews have to cross. Could be. Can't say no, but probably not, because A, this is the dry season, and those canals probably aren't terribly full. Maybe you could wade through them, maybe you could walk through them in the mud, maybe, whatever, I don't know. But they're not flooding yet. That flooding comes later, and even if they were flooding, we're talking about canals that are, 100 yards across or something, not something that you couldn't just almost walk across or swim across. So these three routes, and there were three different roads across through this area during that time that were all there, and people basically had to wade across these canals to get out of Egypt. Those are three possible routes. The fourth route goes to something called the Great Bitter Lake. Now, the Great Bitter Lake is actually, oh, by the way, today, the Suez Canal today comes from here down to here. The Suez Canal was built in the 1860s, I'm sorry, and it comes right through there, and it goes right through what used to be the Great Bitter Lake. And the Great Bitter Lake is still called the Great Bitter Lake. It's still in the middle of the Suez Canal today. It's still there today. So the Great Bitter Lake was a lake that was a seasonal lake that was dry during the dry season. There was one canal that fed it from the Nile River. So when the Nile floods in June, that canal, there comes a point, usually it's about mid to late June, that canal finally reaches the point where it opens and it will begin to flood the Great Bitter Lake. So possibly that was the Red Sea. That's where the whole idea of the Reed Sea comes in. You'll see the Reed Sea. If it was a really shallow lake, it might have had reeds in it, maybe. So that's where people are thinking. Maybe Moses camped here, and God led them across the Reed Sea. The problem is that as near as we can tell, even during the height of the rainy season, when the canals are flooded and the lake is flooded, it's probably about chest deep in that lake. This is why they have reeds, right? Reeds are in very shallow lakes. So there are people that really believe this is where Moses crossed. Maybe I'm inclined not to go that way, but that's me. That's a legitimate possibility that could be it. But if God's going to send in a massive flood and it comes up to your chest, why not just walk out, right, or swim out, or whatever? You're with chariots. Get on your horse and let the horse get you out. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense that that's it. Plus, it's the wrong time of year. We're crossing in April, and this thing doesn't even begin to flood until June. So at that point, it's just dry. You could walk across it. I mean, you walk across on dry land most years in April. It might have to be an exceptionally wet year for that not to be anything else. So these are the four northern routes people talk about. So the next three alternatives all have to do with crossing what we call the Red Sea. By the way, the oldest translation of the Bible, we talked about this last week, is the Septuagint, which is 230 BC. The Septuagint translates Yam Suf as Red Sea. So the Septuagint translates the word Suf, which means whatever it means, into Greek with the Greek word red. Okay, the word red. That's another reason we think this means the Red Sea, is that the oldest translation we have says they crossed the Red Sea. So where do they cross? There are three possibilities that are on your map. We're going to talk about that today. One is that they cross right up here at the very, by the way, this is called the Gulf of Suez. And this is called the Gulf of Aqaba. All of this is considered the Red Sea, but these are called the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. One possibility is that they crossed here. This to me might be the most logical one. It's about 5 miles. There is an underwater ridge, and that underwater ridge is anywhere from 20 to 50 feet below the surface. If God pushed the water out of the way and pushed pushed it down to a depth of 20 to 50 feet with no water on it, you could walk across fairly easily across that. To me, that's the most logical. Another cool thing about this one is there's a mountain ridge. You can kind of see it on your map. There's a mountain ridge that comes right through here. So it's very narrow. To get in, you either have to come in through a very narrow passage from the south, or you have to get in from a very narrow passage from the north. And as you think about it, God had to stop Pharaoh's army for a while this was going on with a big set of flames, right? Fire. So you could block that passage, that narrow passage from the north, or if they came that way, if Pharaoh came that way, or you could block it from the south if Pharaoh came that way, or you could block them both if Pharaoh came in from both directions. Another neat thing about this is it's the only one of the three crossings. The others go west to east, right? West to east. This one actually goes southwest to northeast. In a couple of weeks, when we talk about the wind that's in here, the wind is coming from the east, and then to open it up, and then from the west to close it down. So this has a little bit more of an angle of north-south to it, where an east-west wind would make more sense. So this might be a possibility. And the fact that the mountains are here answers another question: is why didn't Pharaoh just go around it? Well, the mountains are pretty high, and Pharaoh probably didn't go around it because he thought there was just too much mountains to go through there. So he went through that. Now, if you look at this on your little map, it's this little piece right here. Next to the word Egypt, you'll see a little white arrow that says possible crossing or crossing. That is called the Suez Bay, or the Bay of Suez. That, to me, is probably the most logical place of where this happened, but there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is they just spent 7 days getting out of Egypt. Getting out of Egypt meant they crossed the border. Well, the border is beyond that, so what did they do? Did they come back into Egypt and go to there? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, totally makes sense that they would be there. So that's a problem with that idea. There's a problem with all of these, by the way. None of them is perfect. There's a problem with every one of these routes. But that's route number 5, is coming through the Bay of Suez right up in here, which is at the top of the Gulf of Suez, which is part of the Red Sea. That would be one of the alternatives. Questions on that? Okay, now let's look at the other two. And these two have come in recent years, come into more. By the way, that makes a lot of sense if you think Mount Sinai is here, or Mount Horeb is here. And today that is called the Sinai Peninsula, but it wasn't then. The British named it the Sinai Peninsula in the 1820s. Up until then, it had a different name. So the British came along. They beat Napoleon here back in the early 1800s, and then they took over Egypt. And when they did, they renamed this peninsula in here the Sinai Peninsula, and they renamed the mountain Mount Sinai. So it's not the original Mount Sinai. Another interesting problem is when the Jews controlled this after the 1967 war, they sent a zillion archaeological expeditions in here. They found absolutely no evidence of the Jews had ever been there. So it's real. We don't know if this is really the site of Mount Sinai. Today it's called Mount Sinai. If you go to Egypt, you want to go to Mount Sinai, you go there. This makes more sense to me. Again, have your own decision. This makes more sense to me because God, or because it says that it's in the land of Midian. We talked about that a few weeks ago. The land of Midian was always right in here, and then they moved to that area. All right, let's look at Route 6 and 7. Route 6 and 7 said they had to cross the Gulf of Aqaba. Route 6, to get to Route 6, they would have come down along the Red Sea. This is what this map shows, by the way. They would have come down along the Red Sea here on the Sinai Peninsula, come down to the bottom, and maybe the city of Etham, which is going to be in the verse I'm going to read you in a second, might be down here, some people think, but we have no evidence to prove that. We have no archaeological evidence that proves the city of Etham is down there. But that might be it. And then they spent some time waiting there before they crossed. There is a place down there that's large enough that you could have put a couple of million people, and they would have had the potential to stay there for ridge down here that crosses. However, it's about 950 feet below sea level, which is a problem. That's a lot of water for God to move out of the way. But we have a God that can do anything, so maybe he did. Or maybe he raised the sea level up temporarily for a few days and then brought it back down, or whatever. We don't know how it could have happened. But it is interesting that there is an underwater ridge across this is called the Straits of Tiran, by the way. There is an underwater ridge under the Straits of Tiran, and if you come through in a ship, there's a very narrow channel that is 950 feet deep. But most of it is not, and most of it might be less than 100 feet deep. So maybe God did something cool here. A lot of people think this is where they crossed. The last one I'm going to give you is this one here. This is called Nuweiba Beach. And this is a gigantic open area where you easily can have a couple of million people sitting there waiting to cross. On this side here, there's a big beach that kind of goes out here in, and you can have a gigantic number. And there's huge mountains back in here, And the path that goes through it is very windy. So God could have stopped the Egyptian, the mountains, by the way, come right down to the shore. So there's no way around that. You got to go through that one path. God easily could have stopped the Egyptians there. So with put one fire in that path, you could have stopped the Egyptians for as long as you wanted to. So that's another possibility. Maybe they crossed there at Nuweiba Beach. There's a similar problem though with the depth there. Now this is a little wider. It's about 10 miles wide here, but it is less of a slope at the end. And pulling carts up a slope would be a little bit of a challenge. You got carts and chickens and everything else that you're trying to get up a slope at the end and get them down a steep slope at the beginning. The slope was very steep here because the thing is very, very steep. The slope is not as steep here, but it is very deep and it is quite long. So that's another possibility. So those are, and that shows on there, on here. You'll see Nuweiba Beach on there, and you'll see a white arrow. That's another possible route they might have taken. So now you have all the different routes of where they might have gone. I don't know which one's true. I'm going to let you out of here in a minute. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Again, this is not, God gives us all this information. He talks about Etham. Oh, I didn't read you that verse. Let me read you that verse. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear on oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. So the Jews took Joseph's bones with them. After leaving Succoth, we don't know where Succoth was. It might have been here, it might have been here, it might have been over here someplace. After leaving Succoth, that would be the Egyptian border, they camped at Etham. Some people think Etham was down here, but we can't prove that. On the edge of the desert. So it would be at the point where the water is, right? By day the Lord went ahead of them with a pillar of cloud to guide them and on their way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. So God kept them on the road day or night through here, right? God gave them a way to travel by day or night. Did he give him supernatural strength to be able to stay awake and do this? Maybe. Who knows? God can do anything. But he kept them, for some reason, he kept them on the road both day and night. They didn't just travel in the daytime. So they could have traveled long distances. This is quite a long distance down here, by the way. This is, I don't know, probably 150 miles or something. So God could have kept them on the road for a long time to be able to do that. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So the people always had God's direction in front of them. So God was showing them the way. Just follow this cloud and follow this thing. Okay, I've kept you 5 minutes over. Sorry about that. Anybody have any questions? Well, for those of you at home, thank you for joining us today. We are pleased and delighted to have you with us. We pray the Lord will be with you. This week is Christmas, and we pray the Lord will be with you this week.